Joining us now, White House and Foreign Affairs correspondent for Politico, Eli Stokols, NBC News political analyst and former Ohio Governor John Kasich, and former Manhattan Assistant District Attorney Rebecca Roiphe. So, Eli, I mentioned a couple of the things. There's the cryptocurrency, that contest for dinner, the currency itself. There's this plane. There are all the deals, and that's just the stuff we've been talking about lately. But just remind us that the scale and the scope of the questions around Donald Trump's private versus political dealings.
Yeah, this is unlike anything we've seen from a president before, in terms of a president coming in already with a lot of business holdings, a president from the business world. And a lot of Republicans for years said, the country needs to be run more like a business. Well, this is now sort of a manifestation of seeing what that looks like. And this is a businessman in Donald Trump whose entire sort of corporation oftentimes was a lot of branding as much as it was anything else. Yes, he was building buildings, but he was doing a lot of licensing deals. He was doing a lot of branding of himself in the press. There's a lot of smoke and mirrors there. And in terms of the scruples or the sort of, going by the book and putting things in a trust and having a firewall, you heard some rhetoric about that in the first term. You're not really hearing any of that now. And I think it's largely because of what the president and his people feel like they have overcome in terms of impeachments and a felony conviction and investigations, that they say, well, look, these are all partisan. People are coming after us. So, now we're going to do whatever we want. That's something that the president's son, Donald Trump Jr., has essentially said, not exactly in those words, I'm paraphrasing, but, the idea that they won in spite of everything. The American people knew what they were getting in Donald Trump. They were getting a businessman president. And so at this point, it really does feel like the line, there's not much of a line between government business and the Trump's personal business. They're not really trying to draw one. We saw that on the foreign trip to the 3 Middle Eastern countries earlier this month, where you had the president basically, being feted at these palaces, marveling at the architecture, doing deals with these countries with immense sovereign wealth funds. And those countries' sovereign wealth funds are also investing in his family's personal projects, hotel projects across the region, other developments, the Saudi-backed golf, LIV golf tour. That's another thing where they've done tournaments at Trump's resort in Florida, put a lot of money into his resort in Florida. So there's just this meshing of public and governmental interests and the president's personal interests that we've never seen at this scale and scope before.
Also investing in his presidency and his legacy. Donald Trump is getting that plane from Qatar for the presidency. It's going to the Air Force, but then it's supposed to go right to his presidential library after he's done in the White House. So it would only be in use for the public and for, the presidency for a few years, in theory. We'll see how it comes to pass once it's properly vetted and it's gone through all the security, retrogrades from the Air Force. I wonder, Rebecca, where are the guardrails on this? Where are the legal guardrails? Is there anything that can hold a president accountable on the mixing of the private and the professional?
Like so much we're learning now about the way that our country works, it works on a kind of voluntary compliance, a sense of responsibility and honor in the office. So there are some guardrails. Obviously, the president is subject to bribery laws like anyone else, but bribery is notoriously extremely hard to prove. And as we now know, the president enjoys a great deal of immunity from any kind of criminal prosecution. So the web of conflicts of interest rules that we normally use to ensure that this kind of thing doesn't happen do not apply to the president. And then we're seeing the consequences of a president who does not honor the intent behind those laws and instead tries to slip around through the through these sort of cracks that allow him to do exactly what he wants to do, and essentially just kind of hold himself out as the country itself, so that what's in his interest, in his rhetoric, is what's in the country's interest. But what we should keep our eye on is that that is not necessarily true. That, in other words, something that enriches him personally could be at the expense of what is, what is in the best interest of the country. And that's what's at issue here. It's just kind of classic corruption.
Let me ask you about the foreign aspect of this. If you're talking about the meme contest, who can buy as much of Donald Trump's meme coin as possible, and the winners of that, whoever buys the most, get to have that dinner with him. It happened last week. Of the 220 wallets, the Bitcoin wallets tied to the contest winners, 72% appear to be foreign. Rebecca, that we have rules against foreigners contributing to our campaigns. There are rules against foreigners gifting the president anything, the emoluments clause. Is that something that is actionable, or is there a way that Donald Trump has tried to skirt this? Is he handling this differently?
Right. I mean, it is extremely alarming because, in part, it's hard to get at who is buying those the cryptocurrency. So it's even harder to figure out, for those of us on the outside who are not necessarily trying to hold him accountable, but simply figure out who has given him money. That's difficult to do. But yes, I think that again, these are laws, rules, constitutional provisions that have been in place, but they haven't been tested like this. So the way in which they're enforced and people are held accountable for violating them is really uncharted territory. And it's going to be hard to do that in this context. And so while, yes, we have those rules, yes, we have those laws, it's not clear how to enforce them. And it's very clear what the risk is involved, because anybody who can funnel money to the president without, having to make that very clear what's going on, the amount, and, in what way, could be buying influence. And that's, just, again, it's the dictionary definition of corruption.
There are also still questions about how much the public cares. I mean, Democrats obviously care. Democrats are yelling about it. But how much does the broader public care about this, and how much of it has been baked into who Donald Trump is? What do they accept after watching him the first time around? There's an interesting wrinkle, though, when you look at conservative media and the way that they're reacting to some of this stuff. I want to play Tucker Carlson and Sean Ryan reacting to news of the Qatari jet.
I see all these negotiations going on in the Middle East, and then I don't know when these buildings were approved or when these deals got done, but then I also see there's a brand new hotel going up in Dubai or Abu Dhabi and another one going up in Doha, I think. And I'm like, did these just get done also with the deals that just happened over there? Or was this earlier? You would probably know.
No, I don't know.
You don't?
I've not made $1 in the Middle East, not one.
Well, I mean, you're a lot more on the inside than I am. And
No. I'm just a visitor and a traveler and a watcher. But I don't, there's
that stuff kind of worries me. It's
what seems like corruption. Yeah.
Strange exchange, to say the least, there. But Governor, what do you think? Is this something does this ever break through?
Listen, I've had more conversations with people who are big Trump supporters about any number of things. And it's kind of like right now, it's kind of pointless. They just kind of look the other way, same way that, Democrats were about Joe Biden. So here's what I think the problem is, Katie. You had, and I'm glad you guys covered it this way. You had the Clintons, and you remember Whitewater and all that stuff, and then you got Biden, and you got Hunter Biden, and efforts that apparently Biden made to curry favor with others on behalf of his son, and now you have all these things going on, and you had stock trading from congressmen, where they were making money betting on certain stocks that came out of their committees, is what I'm told. And, it's the public is like, wake me up when something happens that I really care about. I think the public is so soured on politicians that they just think they're all crooks. They're all corrupt. And by the way, so why are they picking on Trump? And by the way, why did they cover up Biden and he was incapable? And that's the kind of the conversations that go on, Katie. And at the end of the day, if there is something that is illegal going on, that's where prosecutors step in, and that's where they do things. For me, this is such a bizarre world. I was in public office for 30 years. I never thought about doing anything that could work to my benefit. I said it before that I operated with a certain sense of paranoia. I don't want to do something where I get called before the ethics committee or something where my mother would just shake her head and say, Johnny, why did you do that? I just have a different approach to this. And as it relates to the White House, when I was a kid, we had a little White House underneath our Christmas tree. Now, it's not the Vatican, Katie, but I kind of look at it as being sort of sacrosanct, you know, like sort of, you just don't do anything to disparage it or pull it down. And so I think there's a whole variety of things going on, loyalty to a political party, the fact that other people have done this, and the fact that the public thinks that everybody's a crook. And so there has to be higher standards set. Our whole system gets to be in trouble if people have no confidence whatsoever in the honesty of our public officials. Remember, they used to call Lincoln, right, Honest Abe. You know, the things they would say about the great ones, we need a return to that, in my opinion.